Welcome to the series of seminar video tutorials Germanische Heilkunde by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. My name is Helmut Pilhar. I am the father of Olivia, and Dr. Hummer's appointed lecturer on Germanische Heilkunde, theory. This video tutorial is about the second and the third biological laws of nature, the law of the two-phase of all sensible biological special programs. Provided the conflict can be solved. But what if we cannot resolve the conflict? How do we actually solve conflicts? This second biological law of nature is considered to be generally accepted. The third biological natural law is the ontogenetically conditioned system of the sensible biological special programs. Which programs make cell proliferation, cell loss, or functional failure? The gullet mucus pattern and the outer skin pattern are explained in detail. This third biological law of nature is about to be generally accepted. The objective is to recognize that if the conflict, the DHS, which is the cause, is known, we can remain in control of our own personal affairs. Often only common sense is needed. We recognize that all special programs are not related to degeneration, but run according to natural laws. You will learn more about this in the approximately 1.5 hour seminar video. Ladies and gentlemen, good day to you, and welcome to this seminar video tutorial on the Germanische Heilkunde by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. The topic today is the second and the third biological laws of nature. My objective is that you really understand the Germanische Heilkunde. My hope for humanity lies with you, because with the Germanische Heilkunde, we have a new perspective. Nature is the measure of all things in creation. Artificial religions, political ideologies, or economic interests are determined by contracts. But Mother Nature always concerns itself with creation. And Dr. Hummer has discovered the laws of nature. If we lived with nature, in nature, and from nature, we would be better off. To stand against the laws of nature does not work anyway. This topic is always a part of Germanische Heilkunde, because it has to do with my attitude. If I change my attitude, I can also solve conflicts. Unfortunately, our attitude is non-biological. To live biologically as our ancestors once did, we have to adopt a more biological form of society again. Primitive peoples do not know cancer because they live in biology. But this does not mean that we have to go back to the Stone Age. Not at all. Just as Dr. Hummer's work is suppressed, there is the work of Silvio Gesell, regarding the money system, that is suppressed. Another example is the free energy work of Peter Pleiter, which shows us how everything we need can be in abundance. The knowledge is there, the technologies are there for us to live biologically today. Unfortunately, little of it is widely known. They're not given justice. The system in which we live boycotts Germanische Heilkunde. Therefore, the better you understand it, the better you can help yourself in case of an emergency. You can help in your community, your family members and friends. Germanische Heilkunde must become a kind of popular medicine. Every mother must know how neurodermatitis works in her child. Once you have internalized this knowledge, no one can take it away from you. Nobody can prevent you from solving a conflict. In most cases we don't need emergency medicine at all. We only need emergency medicine in the rarest of cases. The rest, which conventional medicine would like to shove in front of and behind us, we actually do not need. This means that Germanische Heilkunde is the medicine of freedom. With it, neither a doctor nor a medicine stands between your health and you. Ultimately, only I can heal myself, because no one else was there during my conflict. Only I can find my conflict and reveal it to the therapist. No one can solve for me the problem of my partner's cheating, for example. Only I can do that myself. Only I can heal myself. The most important person who has my neurodermatitis, or my diabetes, or my epilepsy is me. As I mentioned before, this knowledge belongs in general education. However, the knowledge cannot protect me from conflict. How should Germanische Heilkunde protect me, for example, when the bank freezes my accounts? The symptoms come on the heels of that. But once I've learned to translate the meaning of the symptoms at the organ level, the conflict usually comes easily to my mind. I'll remember that I've had that symptom ever since that event happened. And danger recognized is danger averted. If I know where a biological program comes from, I can also figure out how to get out of it. Like now, for example. Now, at this moment, we have to diligently teach and study this knowledge so that we understand it. Even though this should have been taught to us in basic biology lessons, in elementary school. The principles of Germanische Heilkunde have been known since 1981. 40 years. What an advantage it would have been, to have grown up with this knowledge. With this knowledge, I could have precisely identified and resolved a conflict myself 10 years ago, when I first suffered it. Trying to find the conflict now, many years later, is laborious. But there is no way around this, because only when I know the exact moment of shock can I know what to do about it. So, as I mentioned before, we can indeed look for the conflict from the organ symptom, such as neurodermatitis, separation, bones, self-esteem, and so on. But we also have to find our precise conflict. Something that's very helpful in this search is to keep a diary of our symptoms, because the tracks are usually very subtle. But by keeping a diary, it's not difficult to recognize the pattern. For example, let's say I always have migraines on the weekend. Sure, this is the crisis of a frontal fear conflict, so it's actually a healing phase symptom. Every crisis is a healing phase symptom, always. Therefore, I'm solving a frontal fear every weekend. I know then, that I must have suffered a frontal fear at some point. And now there is something that's causing a recurrence of that frontal fear, and it's obvious that on weekends there is something gone. So, I can see the pattern. I also know, when I started having the symptoms. Have I had the migraine for 5 years now? Or for a year? Or since childhood? I can now think about this pattern. Something must cause me this recurrence during the week, so that I then solve it on the weekend and get into the healing phase. So, what do I have during the week, that I don't have on the weekend? We have to become our own detectives. We have to figure ourselves out. Of course, that requires that I know what a conflict is in the first place. The migraine has nothing to do with diet and nothing to do with where you sleep. The migraine also has nothing to do with environmental poisoning or anything. I need to know precisely, I must have experienced a shock moment, a DHS, a Dirkhammer syndrome. And I must understand what a shock is, what a biological conflict is in the first place. And of course, I have to have understood about tracks and the rest of the basics. That's why it's tedious to study and gain an overall understanding of Germanische Heilkunde. Still, it's also very satisfying, especially when you can help yourself or your family members to get well again. That's the true application of Germanische Heilkunde, that's the woe. The great amazement, the unleashing of the mind. It's very satisfying. Of course, it also makes spectacular situations unspectacular. For example, you discover blood in your stool, and you know you've solved colon cancer. You know, the trouble I've had for 3 weeks, that's been 3 weeks of conflict activity. Now I'm going to have blood in my stool for 3 weeks, and then it'll be good. And you know you're going to be fine. It's completely unspectacular. Nobody knows about it, but it's highly efficient. And most importantly, you don't have any side effects either. And that is what they want to deprive us of. This is a crime against humanity. And if we don't learn and spread this knowledge ourselves while we are healthy, no one will do it for us. The big problem we have here is, that most people only deal with this issue when they are in a bad way. If one then gets a cancer diagnosis, then he'd become concerned with it. But then we run out of time, and with the cancer diagnosis, we already have the next problem, the next conflict which causes subsequent cancer. Now the chances of survival are dropping, because then I'm just in a panic. That's why it's so important to get informed while you're healthy, that way, you don't panic in the first place. And that's precisely my strategy. So, the second biological law of nature says, provided there is conflict resolution, there is a second phase, a healing phase, a conflict resolved phase. And with conflict resolution our vegetative system inevitably switches from lasting stress to lasting rest. I resolve the conflict, and the stone falls from my soul, inevitably. So, just as the conflict shock was highly acute, isolating, caught me on the wrong foot, and switched my vegetative state into lasting stress. With the resolution, the vegetative state of my entire organism now switches into lasting rest, recovery, and healing. That's also what all programs have in common, whether colon cancer, breast cancer, or bone cancer. We are invariably sympathicotonic with the conflict. That is part of nature's therapy. We are mobilizing all forces to solve the cause, because now the clock is ticking. We don't have forever to find a solution to our conflict, even with such a simple program as periodontal disease. Imagine a wolf in nature with an active biting conflict. With sustained bone osteolysis. His teeth fall out. If he cannot solve his conflict, he will not live much longer. The biological clock always immediately begins to tick with every program. We then also have hardly any appetite and hardly any need for sleep. We run on a special program and we exhaust ourselves. Only with the conflict resolution do I enter the recovery phase. And now in the healing phase. That's when we sleep and eat, that's when we replenish our reserves. Now I eat again, replenishing my energy deficit from the conflict active phase. In the brain, we see the Hummer focus in a target ring shape during the active phase, and edematous in the healing phase. Conventional medicine goes ahead and cuts away the symptom. If I can't solve the cause, they cut away the breast, among other things, for example. But that doesn't mean I've solved my conflict relating to caring for my child. I remain active in the conflict. And this is how we end up with the success results of conventional medicine, that you know. With the conflict resolution, my organism inevitably switches to healing. But now there is the problem that there are conflicts that I'd better not solve. If a territorial loss conflict was active for 9 months, if I solve it, I will have a fatal heart attack. Or let's say, for example, I had a traffic accident at the age of 20, and suffered a scare-fright conflict involving my larynx. And then I had stored driving a car as a track. So that driving keeps the conflict alive for me. In this way, I can build up the conflict load for decades. At 80, I turn in my driver's license, and now I avoid the driving track, and inevitably come into healing. Which in the larynx is the replenishment of that squamous epithelium tissue, under swelling. In conventional medicine this is called laryngeal cancer. This also causes swelling in the brain, but especially at the organ level, the larynx. No one gets a handle on swelling with a 60-year conflict load. Therefore in such a case, the therapist must say, keep driving until you are 105. Don't resolve this conflict. Germanische Heilkunde is not always about resolving every conflict in every circumstance. There are conflict loads that are so large, that if we resolve them, we can't possibly survive the healing phase. In these cases, I have to advise you stay on track. You must not resolve that conflict. But we have to know this in advance. Otherwise, we see the usual story these days of the 80-year-old, who gives up his driver's license, and 30 days later he is diagnosed with throat cancer. Then they just say, yeah, cancer, that's what you die of. And who knew that this has to do with driving a car, or especially that the cause was the traffic accident decades ago? No one has realized that yet. But we could detect all this in advance. The optimal precautionary examination would be a brain CT. Once something bad happens, you do a brain CT. Then you can see, did something happen? Did nothing happen? This lets us know in advance how to behave wisely. If, for example, someone had a traffic accident at age 20, he now knows, oops, I suffered a scare-fright conflict back then. At 30, he does another brain CT and now knows. Aha! That scare-fright conflict is still active. Then he also knows, when he's 80, that if he gives up his driver's license now, it will be fatal. He can decide, in this situation, I'd rather continue driving the car. With this knowledge, we can consciously control the body. We can decide for ourselves, do I come into healing or not? If I continue to stay on the track, I will remain conflict active. Now trying explaining this to a conventional doctor. He'll tell you that you're crazy. But that's how it works. So, sometimes, after too long conflict activity, conflict resolution is not desired, particularly in the red group, the squamous epithelium. These are the territorial areas, where I can build up conflict loads for decades, unlike in the yellow or the orange group. I have to solve conflicts of the glandular tissue or the gland-like tissue. Even programs of the orange group I have to solve, always and as soon as possible. Periodontal disease, if my teeth fall out, then in our society, we say, okay, fine. But in nature, you have a massive problem with that. Is there any more important knowledge than the first and second laws of nature? The first biological law of nature describes the cause of those diseases that arise by themselves. Cancer, chronic diseases, allergies, and psychoses. The Germanische Heilkunde does not apply to poisoning, injury, and malnutrition. I don't have to resolve a conflict in the case of poisoning or the case of malnutrition, or injury. And the second law says, what I have to do to make the activated program disappear. These are the most important discoveries of all. I don't know of any discovery that comes close to that in terms of importance. Maybe the invention of the wheel? We are stuck in this body all our lives, yet we don't know how athlete's foot works, or how breast cancer works. This is explained to us by the Germanische Heilkunde. And I'm stuck in this body all my life. It's bad enough when you're affected yourself. But if your child is affected, or your partner, that's no less bad. 20 years ago, it was said that 1 in 4 people would get cancer. Today they say 1 in 3. The cup does not pass us by. If we're smart, we'll educate ourselves in good time, so that we don't get panicky. Because I, as a non-therapist, I am not allowed to treat someone or play a therapist. I am not allowed by law. Nor would I ever presume to do so. I know so much about the Germanische Heilkunde that I can say very accurately, that I know too little. And the therapist also has responsibility. At the moment it's similar to the situation of how we run with the car to the mechanic and tell him, here's my car. Fix it. In the same way we run to the conventional doctor, but we also run to the Hummer therapist this way. Yes, the patients have no idea what it is about. The patient does not know what he is asking of the therapist. The patient asks the therapist to find the cause of his conflict. The cause is a needle in the haystack. The royal art of Germanische Heilkunde is to be able to give wise advice, so the patient can work out, what do I have to do to find my way out of this? What patients don't realize is, that they are basically putting their lives in the therapist's hands. The way it looks at the moment, most therapists only adorn themselves with the Hummer name and clean the patient out. Every one of their practices up to now. Because unfortunately, they have no idea at all about the Germanische Heilkunde. Therefore I repeat, my audience is the healthy person. The interested one, so that he can help himself in case of a symptom. These first 2 laws of nature are considered to be generally accepted. This was the main reason why Hummer's license to practice was withdrawn. Because he would not renounce his new medicine, and not convert to conventional medicine. But then it turned out, that the Germanische Heilkunde is successfully practiced in Israel. Therefore, the University of Düsseldorf, on behalf of the Medical Association of Hessen, prepared an expert opinion and confirmed that the first 2 laws of nature are recognized. However, a court ruled that Dr. Hummer still would not get his license back, because he would not administer chemo. Let that sink in. The reason for withdrawing his license was dropped, because Dr. Hummer was now officially correct. However, he wasn't praised or anything. No. He was still prohibited from training therapists. But who else should train therapists, if not the discoverer himself? Of course, it's all at our expense. Because we continue to have poison gas, chemo, forced on us, no matter what type of cancer. And so we see that the system we live in is one big crime. Now, who is going to help us change that? There is a study from France that ran for 9 years. A certain Mr. Marc Frechet, you can research this yourself on the internet, was treating patients in accordance with Dr. Hummer on behalf of the hospital. After 9 years, 85% of his cancer patients had survived. In conventional medicine, 5% survived the first 5 years. And with this doctor, 85% survived for 9 years. What are the side effects of spontaneous recovery? None. That's real healing. In conventional medicine, even if you survive 5 years, most of the time you are missing a piece of the brain or a piece of the intestine, or a breast. And that is what conventional doctors call healing. You're poisoned and burned, but that's what they call healing. But this group of Marc Frechet was well taken care of. They weren't scared, they were educated, they rejected everything themselves, as far as conventional medicine was concerned. And they survived 85% of the time. So, when I practice Germanische Heilkunde, it means that I am not afraid. That I have understood it myself. That I can also interpret my organ symptoms correctly. That means then, for example, if I have leukemia, that I then say, thank God I was able to solve this self-devaluation conflict. And thank God now, because tomorrow I would have had one more day of conflict load. That's how far I must have understood it, because panic usually sets in immediately with the diagnosis of leukemia. But if I can interpret the organ level correctly and know that leukemia is only healing from anemia and bone cancer, I am happy about it. And that is an entirely different starting point. If I can understand this much, I can increase the probability of my survival and recovery 17 times. That's what we're being denied. But as mentioned before, the information is there, we just have to get it into our heads. Once it is in our heads, then no one can take it away from us. Unfortunately, of course we still have the problem that we cannot practice Germanische Heilkunde at all. For example, if you put a child in kindergarten, he suffers separation from the mother. And kindergarten is compulsory. How will you help your child to solve this conflict? If you leave the child at home, the authorities will come and take your child away from you. Or try to protect your child from early sexualization. There are school classes where several children collapse spontaneously. They have a shock. From this follows the sexual conflicts, ADD and ADHD. How will you help your child resolve these conflicts, if the child continues to be subjected to early sexualization? Yes, that is where we quickly reach our limits. The best understanding of Germanische Heilkunde does not help as long as the child has to go there. We have to change all that. If I cannot solve the conflict, then I remain sympathicatonic, in perpetual stress. I hardly eat, I hardly sleep, and at some point the battery is empty. I succumb to emaciation. An example of this. A young woman fell in love with a man and wanted children from him. The man kept her dangling between hope and despair. This affected her central self-value, her spine. Her vertebrae were dissolving. Bone tissue, controlled by the cerebrum, as we know from the third law, has cellular loss or depletion in the active phase. She talked to Hummer on the phone, and they found the conflict. But she couldn't force the man. If he didn't want to, what did she want to do? Her parents were completely overwhelmed with her care, and sent their daughter to hospice. There they made short work of using morphine, to put her to death. Now the all-important question, is Germanische Heilkunde true, or is it not true? Let's put it this way, death does not indicate a lack of success of the natural laws. Take note, Germanische Heilkunde is first and foremost a science of recognition. It describes 5 biological laws of nature. If I cannot solve the conflict, one possibility is death from emaciation. When it comes to natural laws, there are, as already mentioned, no alternatives. You could irradiate this woman, chemotherapy her, and you could operate as much as you want. But you cannot save her. As long as the patient's brain program is set to cell destruction, the organ will also undergo cell destruction. We in Germanische Heilkunde are accused of making it easy for ourselves by saying, if the patient dies, it's his fault. He couldn't solve his conflict. Beware of blaming. Let's say an employer fires an employee, and the employee suffers a conflict with liver cancer, because he no longer knows how to feed himself. Who is to blame for this? The employee who no longer has a job? Is he to blame? Watch out for the blame game. It was like this for me with my daughter Olivia. I caused all this whole mess, to which my child reacted with liver cancer. But at that time I didn't know any better. I didn't see any emergency. Today, I know better. When I have other information, I can say, what do I care about the nonsense I said yesterday? Today, I know better. It is only bad if I hold on to the old things after I know better. That is not good. But we point it out to the patient. Here, right here is where the problem's buried, and you have to solve the cause. The enemy of the good is the better. You believe you have to find a better man before the stone will fall from your soul. But if only she can laugh about it, then the conflict is solved. Meanwhile, in conventional medicine, if the patient dies, then they simply say it was cancer. They have nothing better. Patients in conventional medicine are dying on a conveyor belt, and no one is upset about it. It's as if they had a license to kill. Nobody questions, is it really necessary that almost all of them die? And we are told that he practiced what Hummer taught him and died. This is then published in all the newspapers, for half a year. In what way did he practice what Hummer taught him? Practicing Hummer means that the patient is fully aware of what's going on, and doesn't do anything stupid like therapeutic fasting or similar. To practice Hummer's teachings means that the patient does not panic. He knows what it is all about. To practice Hummer's teaching means legality. If the patient is on sick leave for 3 months and refuses everything, chemotherapy and so on, he must not be pressured by the doctors. To practice Hummer means to use emergency medicine, case by case. Do I need surgery? Do I need medication? Where do we have that? The reality is that the patient who wants to practice Hummer's teachings and rejects conventional medicine has to hide. He must go underground, and he must often protect himself from his family members, who are all talking at him. And the doctor declares him crazy. Where is there a clinic where Hummer can be practiced? The talk about Hummer deaths is a big joke of the system. So, one possibility is death from emaciation. The second possibility is that the patient does not manage to resolve the conflict, but he can come to terms with it. He can come to terms with it and thereby transform the intensity down and grow old with it. But the program remains, simmering. You see this perfectly with loss of territory, the well-known heart attack. We are talking about the territorial area in the cerebral cortex. This is the youngest and the most complex brain. This is where social interaction is constructed. For the pack to hunt successfully, it needs an alpha, a command, a structure like in a company. It needs a boss and many employees. The second wolf is constructed by a conflict, the classical territorial fight. The strong defeat the weaker and the weaker one has a conflict. He tries to resolve the conflict, but he cannot. He can only resign himself to his situation. He is weaker than the alpha and he cannot solve the conflict, he can only resign himself to it. With us men, the program is set in such a way that if we fight for 6 months in vain, then we resign. We give up. And what happens when I give up is, the right male territorial area side closes to me. The left female brain side is open. From now on I am soft. This brain relay also controls my libido, which is now in the basement. I have no more sex drive. And here in the territory area, we also have fixations. When he suffers his territorial loss conflict with the alpha is programmed into his conflict. He is now gaily fixated on the alpha. By the way, that's also what being gay is. Of course, homosexuality has to do with conflict. Because it cannot be hereditary. Same-sex people cannot reproduce. Yes, they do try, but it just doesn't work. I also have absolutely nothing against gays, one less competitor. As far as I'm concerned, all men could be gay, so, he's now gaily fixated on the alpha, and when the alpha says, "We're going to go get a deer," the second wolf says, "Sir, yes sir." And that's the only way they can successfully hunt and exist. If one wolf says, "Oh, always you with your stupid deer. I'm going to get a goose from the lake," and the other says, "I'll get me a rabbit from the field," then they are not successful. When the female ovulates, the alpha is ready. The alpha is the one who has no conflicts in the territorial area. He is the best, the strongest. Every farmer adheres to this principle. If the farmer wants calves, the farmer gets a strong bull, because wants healthy and strong calves. It's a principle of nature. This has nothing to do with morals and religion at all. Nature has its strategy and has always been the guarantor that we exist. So, the ovulating female always has the best, the alpha. With my resignation to territorial defeat, I can transform my conflict down. My angina pectoris decreases and I can become ancient with it. I don't die of emaciation, because the pack needs its second wolves. The pack needs only one alpha, one is enough. But there has to be a lot of second wolves. It doesn't work any other way. And these second wolves must not die of emaciation. There is a rule for that, if we transform it down, we can become age-old with it. Only we are not allowed to solve this conflict then. If we resolve this conflict after more than 9 months, what does that mean in nature? It means that I am alpha again. And now nature says, wait a minute, you again want to be responsible for reproduction? Now let's see if you could resolve this conflict in a reasonable time. If you take too long here, you are not the best, and you're going to die of a heart attack. Before you keep stressing about who's the real alpha, I'll let you die. That's nature. I mean, all we can do is observe that it is, and learn our lessons from that. Germanische Heilkunde is also an experiential medicine. The experience is, the woman is 9 months pregnant. She is not 8 months pregnant or even 10 months pregnant, she is 9 months pregnant. Why that is another story. Elephants are pregnant for almost 2 years. But with us humans it is just 9 months. So, it is also with the loss of territory, 9 months, and if I solve my loss of territory afterward, I am dead. Nature will already have a reason for it. And that's the genius of Dr. Hummer, that this is coherent in itself, is conclusive in itself, and has a natural logic. We usually instinctively stop trying to solve these conflicts. How does this instinctive not solving work? Let's say my wife says, "Helmut, life was awesome with you, but adios, I'm out of here." Boom. I've lost my wife. It's highly acute, isolating, and it caught me on the wrong foot. Now I'm using all my strength to get my wife back, to kill the rival. But if I don't succeed within 6 months, I resign. After 6 months, I think to myself, I'm going to get lost. Through this, I can transform the conflict down. But as long as a man continues to fight, he is a man. If he no longer fights, he is cerebrally castrated and in principle gay, from now on. Then, if my wife wants to come back after 9 months, I don't want her anymore, because I'm gay now. I'm not into women anymore. Now I'm into men or contraceptive pill-taking masculinized women. By the way, whether a man lives out his homosexuality or not, that is absolutely not the issue in nature. Dr. Hummer also says, if the softie, who is feminine in essence, lies in bed with a pill-taking masculine woman, there are effectively 2 gays in bed. It's the same thing. The decisive thing for nature is, that he does not reproduce. Only that is the point. Someone who has lost his territory is no longer capable of reproducing. Now we come to erroneous conflict resolution. As mentioned before, there are conflicts that I'd better not solve. For example, this loss of territory conflict that's gone on longer than 9 months. Let's say, instead of being promoted in my company as discussed and promised, I get demoted. Now I have lost my territory. I mobilize all my strength to solve the problem. But after 6 months, I don't make it. Now I think to myself, the stupid company. I'll get through the few years before I retire, but I certainly won't make any more effort for this company. And so, I can transform the conflict down. I can grow old with it. But now comes the erroneous conflict resolution, the pension. With retirement, a new phase of life begins for me. The problems in the company now vanish into thin air. Now I have become president of my bird breeder association. And already next year, I can appoint myself Governor General. Now I suddenly have my territory back. I've solved this conflict. But of course far after 9 months. By mistake. 6 weeks later comes my fatal heart attack. The Minister of Finance calls this socially acceptable early death. Yes, he is happy about that. The slave was used optimally. This is an erroneous conflict solution, because there is no pension in nature. The wolf can't say, "Hey, guys, look at the clock. Pension." Caribbean. In nature, he would not resolve this type of conflict. Only in our society. You have to warn the patient, watch out for the pension. We already know that in advance. We can tell him, be careful with the pension. If you solve the conflict, you won't survive. Better you stay in the company, as a night watchman. And preferably without pay so that you get angry with the company, every day. Then you'll live longer. In conventional medicine, this patient comes to the doctor only when he is already in crisis. But by then it is too late. He must not solve the conflict. Try to explain all this to somebody. This is the basic understanding, but unfortunately it is missing everywhere. There is one more possibility, not just for loss of territory, but in a constellation generally. In a territorial constellation, the patient suffers a second conflict in addition to his still active first territorial conflict. The second territorial conflict strikes in the opposite side of the brain. Here, by the way, we are with the bronchi, with the larynx, with asthma, with stuttering. Here's the heart attack, the pulmonary embolism, which is also accompanied by an abnormal pap smear. Here, the hepatic bile ducts, the gastric ulcer and hemorrhoids. We are at the urinary tract. The urinary tract infection is the healing from a territorial marking conflict. Yes, these are the territorial conflicts. There are masculine and feminine ones. And constellation always means, Hummer focus active on the left and another active on the right. In the territorial constellation, the conflict loading stops. The squamous epithelial tissue ulcerated during the conflict active phase, but now with the constellation, that cancer stops. At the organ level I now feel healthy. But with the onset of the second conflict, emotional maturation also stops, one remains childish. These are the big boys who play with their cars. And you also look younger. By the way, you can recognize the emotional maturity level of a person when he reacts emotionally. When he rages, or when he cries, or when he throws himself on the floor and bangs his fists against the ground. Or when he makes a decision that a 5-year-old would make. That's how you can tell emotional maturity. In a territorial constellation we are manic depressive. Manic depression takes place only in the territorial area, nowhere else. Not outside and not with the skin, as with neurodermatitis. Not with the muscles and not with the intestines. Not in the yellow group, and not in the orange group. Only in the territorial area of the red group can manic depressive feelings originate. So, once again, bronchial tubes, larynx, coronary arteries, stomach, liver bile ducts, the hemorrhoids, the urinary tract, that's where manic depression occurs. With it, the conflict loading stops. And we are seemingly healthy at the organ level. But now we are psychologically conspicuous. Developmentally arrested, manic depressive, but seemingly healthy. We can grow old with it, and it stops cancer. The supersense here is only for men. In this way, nature says. Since you already couldn't solve one territorial conflict, you definitely can't solve 2 such conflicts. I'm taking you out of the race. You don't have to take part in the hard fight for the top anymore. From now on, you enjoy puppy protection again. You are not to be taken seriously. From now on you are the class clown, which you already know from your school days. There's usually one guy who everyone goes after, and he's also really stupid. And he just gets a beating from everyone. The class clown. And nature says, "You are crazy now." An adequate role for you in the pack, based on your maturity level, is kindergarten teacher. If he's arrested at age 5 in his maturity development, he can be 50, but he has the maturity of a 5-year-old. He gets along very well with children. Nature just goes on saying, "Nothing's going to happen to you." You get put on hold, and it stops the conflict loading. And he becomes immersed, unable to change his situation. All he can do is wait, until the situation changes in his favor. Only when the situation changes in his favor, can he solve the constellation. He has no conflict load on his constellation. Therefore he also survives the crises, and could even be alpha again. So, the supersense of this constellation is that one is put on ice, frozen, waiting for better times. But one is protected. One becomes psychologically conspicuous, one is not taken seriously, but one is protected. And I said that's just for the man, because it's about command. Whereas in nature, women don't have a constellation. Because the woman, should she ever get into a constellation, at the latest with her next ovulation, the alpha is with her. And she'll have a young one from the alpha. With this, a new life begins for her, with her child. So again, these three possibilities exist, unless we can resolve the conflict. Death from emaciation, downgrading of the conflict but keeping it permanently, or a schizophrenic constellation in the territorial area. Note, only here in the territorial areas does the conflict loading stop in a constellation, nowhere else. I am psychically conspicuous, manic depressive, developmentally arrested, but physically healthy. And now to the topic, how do you solve conflicts? Quite trivial. What is the flu? First of all, flu is in any case a healing phase. This one has intestinal flu. He was able to resolve a conflict of anger. In the active phase he had constipation. In the healing phase he has diarrhea and intestinal colic, which hurts. The other one has bone flu. He had suffered a self-devaluation conflict, which he was able to solve. In the active phase his bone is decalcified, that makes holes, osteoporosis. In the healing phase it is repaired again under swelling. This really hurts. The third person has bronchitis. After suffering, depending on his handedness, either a territorial fear conflict or a scare-fright conflict in the territorial area. In the active phase the squamous epithelium of the bronchi or larynx ulcerated. In healing it is repaired with swelling. This also hurts. In these programs the active phase is sensory numbness, you don't feel anything. But the healing phase, that hurts. Now it's said, he's got just the flu. I'm pretty sure every one of us has had the flu, and what exactly does that mean? It means nothing more than that we have suffered a conflict, and resolved it. Otherwise, we could not have had the flu. So, how did you do that? Without knowing anything about Dr. Hummer? How could you have resolved your conflict? Instinctively. Intuitively. At the moment of the DHS, nature's therapy starts. On the level of the psyche, we immediately have obsessive thinking. All thoughts revolve around the problem, searching for a solution. We instantly mobilize all forces to solve the problem, and we do not rest until the conflict is solved. Until the stone has fallen from our soul. Then we come into healing, right at that moment. This works the same even with a baby. Let's imagine a mother holding her baby. Suddenly a soldier comes and snatches the baby from her arms. Look at the face of the mother, and also of the baby. Both have a conflict. What do? They scream, scream, scream until they're together again. Only then does the stone fall from their souls. It works the same way with animals. Take the bone away from the dog. What does he do? He will try to snatch the bone from you again. He will not rest until he has the bone again, until the stone falls from his soul. So, that's how we solve the conflicts as a rule. Instinctively. Intuitively. These are sensible programs. Nature has programmed these programs into us, just in case. I think this concept is ingenious. So far, we have managed to solve our conflicts, otherwise we would not be sitting here now. And we have all had these programs running dozens of times. Many conflicts we have also transformed down, or we are in constellation. Most of us are in constellation, unfortunately. Our scrap society is responsible for this. We are all on ice, so to speak. We are all waiting for better times. But beware, there is no patent solution for any conflict. Let's take the example of liver cancer. Liver cancer is always starvation. Always. I can suffer a starvation conflict for myself. I don't know how I'll feed myself anymore. In this case, I have numerous liver nodules, because I have gone bankrupt. My bank accounts have been seized. I have lost everything. I no longer know how to feed myself. I may even have suffered a starvation conflict on behalf of someone else. Of course, I may also have suffered a separation conflict of someone else, for example. Or an attack against the heart conflict, as well as a self-devaluation conflict. Or even a starvation conflict. If, for example, my daughter marries a deadbeat, and I'm worried that the deadbeat can't possibly feed my daughter, then I only have a single liver focus. But there are also hundreds of different starvation conflicts. I can suffer a starvation conflict because I have gone bankrupt. But I could also suffer a starvation conflict because I have colon cancer. I'm worried that I won't be able to get the food through. I'm going to starve to death because of a bowel obstruction. And I can suffer a starvation conflict for my daughter. I've had liver cancer 3 times, I've had starvation conflict 3 times. But there is no silver bullet to resolve them. In the first case, I would need money to settle my accounts. In the second case, I would need a potent son-in-law, and in the third case, I would need the colon cancer gone. You can see how individual things are. Of course, that doesn't make things easy. We humans are as individual as our conflicts are, but so are the solutions. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. The conventional physician simply makes it easy for himself. Liver cancer? Chemo. Colon cancer? Breast cancer? Bone cancer? Lung cancer? Chemo, chemo, chemo. Child, adult, old man, it doesn't matter. Chemo. For themselves, oncologists consistently reject chemo, and that is a crime, but as I said, we usually solve our conflicts instinctively, intuitively. And sometimes, we even solve conflicts by chance. By chance, the great love of yesteryear is incredibly ugly today, and you're healthy. Or by chance, the lightning strikes the mother-in-law, and thus solves all my problems. I am healthy by chance. If you haven't managed to solve your conflicts instinctively, intuitively, or by chance so far, we have the tools to get to the bottom of our problems. It is helpful to keep a symptom diary. Then you can see, aha. I always have the migraine on the weekend, so I have to have an active conflict during the week. How long have I had this? For 5 years, so I have to start my search 5 years ago. The rest is the track. Suppose I can identify that now? 5 years ago something terrible happened to me at the company with the boss. At that time I thought, he's going to beat me up. And since then, the boss has been the track, so to speak. Now I can think about what to do next. Do I quit? Then I am healthy and I look for another job, with a better boss? Or do I accept this situation? First, we have to find the exact DHS, the conflict shock. There are also no 2 identical frontal fear conflicts. Yes, of course, it may have been the traffic accident, for example, to which I reacted with frontal fear. And now I drive the car, all week, every day. I don't drive a car on weekends, I'm not on track, and I'm resolving my conflict. So, the migraine's always after resolving the danger from the front, the frontal fear. But which one exactly? That's what you have to determine. In general, you can say that the best conflict resolution is always real conflict resolution. You have breast cancer because your child is sick. For the conflict to be resolved, your child must become healthy. Cutting off your breast does not solve the conflict about your child. You remain in perpetual stress and wear yourself out. Only if the best solution of the conflict, the real solution of the conflict, isn't possible, for example if the child dies, should a second best solution be found. Here, a view into nature often helps. What does the sheep's mother do when the wolf snatches her cub? She immediately becomes pregnant again, and has a new lamb. This does not mean that a mother must forget her dead child. But the new child helps her get over the loss, over the death of the other child. The other dead child benefits nothing at all, if the mother dies of emaciation because of her ongoing conflict. A new child helps the mother to solve the conflict. This is a patent solution in nature. That would also be the patent solution for us humans. Or the same when my beloved dog dies. It is irretrievable, when such a beloved person dies, or an animal dies. A new puppy helps me to solve such a conflict. A new child, a new dog, or a new wife. For example, if my wife runs away, I need a new wife. Don't make this too complicated. Because if I don't do that and don't resolve my conflict, the conflict will remain active. And if the second best solution is not possible, perhaps because you are too old or something, then there must be a third best solution. Such as an intellectual solution, or a religious solution. In the hereafter we will be one again. But beware, these intellectual solutions aren't as final. We can easily fall away from the faith. And only we adult humans can use this solution. The animal cannot. The animal always needs a real conflict solution. A child cannot solve his conflicts intellectually, either. The child needs a real conflict solution. When the child suffers from the separation from the mother, the child cannot realize, Mom will come back in the evening after all. A young child has no temporal imagination for this. The child needs her mother now, in order to solve the conflict. And for a toddler there is only the now. The past is past, and the future is not yet here. Actually, there is only the now. We live always and forever only in the now. And we always have and always will live in the now. The child needs the mother now. We adults have a temporal imagination to know that in the evening, our partner will come again. The adult has that, but the child does not. And neither does the animal. If I have a steak at the table and I tell my Rottweiler bitch, Emma, you'll get to the steak in the evening, she asks me if I've gone crazy. She needs the steak now. By the way, even the big African Maasai couldn't be domesticated. If you locked them up to punish them, they were dead within 2 days. They didn't understand that they would be released in 3 months. They said to themselves, I don't want to live like this, and they gave up and practically killed themselves mentally. To put it in a nutshell, the best conflict resolution for children and animals is only real conflict resolution. Intellectually, they have no chance. But real conflict resolution is also the best and durable variant for us adults. One can also get over his conflict. For example, Dr. Hummer with his testicle cyst. That was a solved lost conflict about his son Dirk. Dr. Hummer was conflict active for 3 months. It took him 3 months and a lot of talking to his wife about the death of their son, because he seriously blamed himself. He had observed how the Savoy's lawyers interacted with the chief physicians, so that they would let his son die. That was his precise conflict. The Savoy Prince Victor Emmanuel shot Dirk without intending. He didn't even see him, the bullet went through 2 boat walls. But then they let the boy die. The Savoys didn't want to have a handicapped man, who would forever remind them of the event. And Dr. Hummer observed all this, which was actually what was so highly conflicting for Dr. Hummer. You can get over that too. As I said, when a loved one dies, it's irretrievable. And we have in all human cultures these rituals, these funeral ceremonies. People get together and have a good cry to get over it. And if you miss that, if you still have an unpaid bill with a deceased person, then you have to make up for it. For example, by writing a letter, in which you get everything off your chest. You might have the letter notarized by a relative and burn it, and you take the ashes to the grave to get over it. This of course is, where the therapist's ingenuity comes in. As I said, the royal art of Germanische Heilkunde is wise counsel. Everything else can be learned, brain CT reading and memorizing the diagnostic chart, and correctly identifying the symptom. Conflict active phase. Healing phase? All of that can be learned. But wisdom cannot be learned. A therapist once had a patient case. The man was 25 and mentally disturbed. His father regularly beat up the whole family. He regularly beat up his wife and children. That is why the young man was psychotic. His father had been dead for 3 years. The therapist advised his patient to go to his father's grave and throw it all out. Tell this to the father, everything that came to his mind. The young man did that. He almost desecrated the grave, but his psychoses were resolved. For him, a new life could begin. Let's put it this way. If you're a man getting beaten up by your wife over and over again, there's no point in saying, I'll look for a woman who beats me up less. Just avoid her. Or if you're being bullied at work, just get out of the way, get a new job. Or change school. Some teachers simply have a problem with certain children. You can only avoid them, you can't change the person, but you can avoid the track. That is also what every little animal does. Even you yourself, we all have many issues which we simply avoid, and we also have every right to do so. This is the very best option, the safest option. What about diving straight into it with desensitization? Dr. Hummer usually warned against desensitization, because it mostly headed in the wrong direction. What does desensitization mean? As a therapist, I deliberately chase the patient down the track, hoping that he can overcome it. But if he can't overcome the conflict, I, as a therapist, cause the patient to relapse. And that's what usually happens. A person who fell down a ladder and had a motor conflict, survived the fall with a lot of luck, and had his epileptic seizure in the crisis. Now he has a track. Every time he climbs somewhere, he worries whether he will fall down again. When he gets back to the ground in one piece, he resolves the recurrence, and he has another epileptic seizure. He knows that, so he just avoids climbing anywhere. If you make such a person climb 10 meters up a ladder or climb a tree, he will have a recurrence. You'll cause a relapse in the patient. That is nonsense. Therapeutically, it is nonsense. Avoid the track. But there are also conflicts where it makes sense. A 2-year-old girl falls, head first, into a pond. She gets mud in her mouth and suffers a fear-disgust conflict. This relay is within the territorial area as well, and in a left-handed child we have what is called the night hop. And this child suffers a fear-disgust conflict with diabetes. The track is head underwater, and it occurs in the bathtub. So now there's the option of avoiding the track, avoiding the water. But to avoid water for a lifetime might be difficult. The variant which the parents now practice on the advice of Dr. Hummer is, to take away the child's fear of water. In the shallow and lukewarm water of the bathtub, with toys. So that the child enjoys splashing around, to help her to overcome the conflict. In this case, the therapist's tact is also required. Where is desensitization possible, and where not? When you grow up, many conflicts that you had in childhood are no longer relevant. For example, neurodermatitis, which disappears with puberty. For an infant, separation from the mother is existential. And the child suffers a separation conflict with neurodermatitis. But when the child is 16 and says, "Mom, today I'm going to the disco," and the mom says, "But I'm coming with you," then the child will say, "Please, Mom." No. That's embarrassing. Then she cuts herself off from her mother. Then the neurodermatitis disappears. So, the conflicts that you had in childhood are irrelevant today. Instead, you have many conflicts today that you didn't have in childhood. For example, the topic of money. As a child, you didn't care about it at all. But today, it's a highly conflicting issue for you. These are the conflicts of existence. Change of hormonal state can also help us get over a conflict. If my hormonal state changes, my sense of conflict changes. And I can solve conflicts just by that. I can reperceive conflicts, so that they jump over into the territorial area. From female to male. So, now to get an example of a conflict. A hormonally feminine woman has no male territorial behavior. For example, if the neighbor puts her garbage container in the driveway of this female, she doesn't even notice. But if the neighbor puts her garbage can in Grandma's driveway, Grandma says, "She does that on purpose to annoy me, every day." The hormonally masculine woman has a problem with that. An example of reperceiving. The thief comes through the window. With female hormones, a woman goes on the defensive with scare fright. Oh no. A thief. And she puts a blanket over her head. But if the burglar breaks in through Granny's window to the granny, she with her masculine hormones goes on the offensive, with a broom. Feminine scare fright, masculine territorial fear. The feminine reaction hits the right-hander, in the larynx, the masculine in the bronchial tubes. The same event, but seen with different eyes, once seen with feminine eyes, once seen with masculine. In this way then, the conflict can jump. Let's say for example, a hormonally feminine female has suffered a scare fright conflict and is now coming into her change. Then the Hummer focus jumps from her laryngeal relay to her bronchial relay. The larynx goes into resolution, and the bronchial now builds up conflict load. In this way, the conflict is reperceived. An example of conflict resolution. A typical childhood sexual conflict is witnessing an exhibitionist. Now, when a woman who has had her sexual conflict active since seeing an exhibitionist in the age of 5, and now she comes into the change, she becomes a man. The woman becomes a man, and the man becomes a woman. By the way, this has nothing to do with handedness, it's just hormonal masculinity or femininity. There are masculine women, and there are feminine men. Some right-handed men are feminine, and some left-handed men are feminine. But now, this woman hormonally becomes masculine, and an exhibitionist is not an issue for a man. When the exhibitionist approaches a man and opens his coat, a man says, "Mine is bigger, get lost." So now, this woman comes into the change and resolves her conflict, which had been active since childhood. If she was in a constellation and was protected by it, then she'll survive the pulmonary embolism. This relay also controls vaginal orgasm. All her life this woman could only respond with clitoral orgasm. But now she comes into the change and has a vaginal orgasm for the first time in her life and thinks, whoa, this man, he's done something that no one has ever done before. In reality, she had just resolved a sexual conflict from childhood. You hear that a lot, that's the case. Granny comes out of the supermarket, and an exhibitionist exposes himself in front of her. Says Granny, oh, now I know what I forgot, the shrimp. So, for the hormonally masculine Granny, an exhibitionist is not an issue. Being presented with a fait accompli, and ending with horror is often better than a horror without end. Here's a second example of this. A 70-year-old woman has been allergic to cat dander with conjunctivitis since she was 20 years old. Conjunctivitis is the visual separation, out-of-sight conflict. Although she does not know Dr. Hummer at all, she knows her conflict. When she was 20, the neighbor's kitten ran to her and she adored it. But one day the cat stopped coming. Since then, she has had her cat hair allergy with conjunctiva, and she knows it. At the age of 70, the patient asks the neighbor, say, what happened to that kitten? Says the neighbor, yes, it died. And the allergy was gone. She has secretly hoped for almost 50 years, that the kitten would once again come around the corner. She had to hear the words, the cat is dead, so that this could come into her consciousness. And the allergy was gone. Here's another example of ending a conflict with terror. My sister-in-law was supposed to be a princess. Unfortunately, something went wrong in karma. She is so pedantic, so fashionable. She is indeed a nice person, she'd do anything for you, but she more or less hovers on cloud 9. She had a boyfriend in a noble district of Vienna, with such a huge apartment, appropriate to her status as a princess. Only this man gave her a sexual conflict, and the solution for her sexual conflict was her current husband. The only problem was, that he had his apartment in the suburban area of Vienna. The town was called Fischamend, near the airport. This was a disaster for Veronica. She still had all her things, clothes, cosmetics and so on, in the posh apartment from her former guy, but she was with the new guy. And she was commuting between the apartments. And she had a chronic bladder infection, a conflict of determining the location. Where do I belong? Whose territory do I actually belong to now? Territory conflict. One day my brother-in-law had enough and said, girl, it doesn't work like that. Either you move in or you move out, you have a week to decide. Then she got down to business and moved to Fischamend. But that was also the solution for her, and the urinary bladder also stopped responding. So within limits, such a slap in the face at the right moment can be very healing. As crazy as it sounds, suffering an even worse conflict is also a solution to various trifling conflicts. Then such a trifling conflict becomes irrelevant. An alternative practitioner once told me the following experience. A woman came to him with an open leg wound. This is the periosteum, when it stops nourishing the tissue. This is a brutal separation conflict. Anyway, this therapist did a blood analysis and said, according to my results, you should have been dead a long time since. His words were prophetic. A few weeks later, she died of pulmonary nodules. But strangely enough, by then her legs had healed. So, he gave her an even worse conflict, and she was able to get over her brutal separation, the legs healed. But actually, you should be dead. She heard the diagnosis, believed it. And this belief cost her her life. If a patient can laugh about his conflict, that is an unmistakable sign that the conflict has been settled and finally resolved. Here's a really nice example. Biological conflicts need a biological solution. And this is where almost all therapists who call themselves Hummer therapists have such a hard time. A mother reported about her daughter, that an older student in the playground she had bumped into, knocking her to the ground. And then the boy kicked her, as she lay on the ground, in her stomach and her head. The child suffered a motor conflict. At night, the girl would lash out wildly. She dreamed this scene over and over again, always the same. This mother discovered her daughter's story and advised her to forgive the boy. Whenever she saw him, she should forgive him in her mind. And the child practiced this. But the following day, the bed was rumpled again. One day, the girl saw this boy sitting on a half-high wall in the playground. Suddenly, and for no apparent reason, he tumbled off head over heels. With that she could laugh about him. And so the haunting was gone, the conflict solved. This is the reason Dr. Hummer advised his patients who had received a shocking, "You have cancer" diagnosis from the oncologist, that they should imagine the oncologist taking a shit, so that they can laugh at him. A seminar participant recently told us that her brother, who is 60 and in good health, went for a checkup. The doctor gave him a cancer diagnosis. The brother was shocked. "Don't ever tell me such nonsense," he said before punching the doctor in the face, turning on his heel and storming out. That's the right way of dealing with oncologists and their most brutal possible diagnosis. Brutally creating business for themselves. Oncologists really get off on that, because it lets them play God above the people. The only problem is, that they know very well what this shocking diagnosis opening does to the patient's psyche. It's such a self-fulfilling prophecy, a kill shot. How can you resolve conflicts, when you're constantly humiliated? When people look down on you, when you can't do anything right. Do something where the others have to look up to you. Here's a really nice case study of this with polyarthritis. A German expatriate wants to join the higher society. She is in her mid-20s and takes a golfer as a boyfriend and tries to play golf herself. But she only receives snide remarks. That with your foot position, it won't work. Self-devaluation conflict partner foot. You're holding the club, all wrong. Self-devaluation conflict partner hand. One day she leaves it with the golfer, and she gets a lawyer. She also has children with this lawyer, which was the solution to her golf ineptitude self-devaluation conflicts. This led to degrading remarks from her partner, about her hand and foot. Her lawyer was such an enthusiastic walker. But because of her healing face pain, his wife couldn't walk with him. He told her, "You're just sick," and on her partner's side shoulder, she suffered a self-devaluation conflict. She also suffered a lame duck unsporting self-devaluation conflict on her partner's side knee. Those two together were then her polyarthritis. Dr. Hummer knew that she was an avid dancer, but her husband wouldn't dance at all, because he couldn't. "Why don't you set up a monthly dance tea and sweep the hall?" Dr. Hummer advised, "and let your husband sit on the sofa, embarrassed. And he having to look up at you." It was about increasing her self-esteem. No one can forbid her that. You just have to know where to start, respectively, to change your inner attitude. So, if I have a conflict with a person that I can't solve, I can try to get my equities out of that person for myself, so that I stop reacting to this person, in either a positive or negative sense. That in a sense, I don't give a damn about them. That is, of course, the most elegant conflict resolution. For example, let's say I have a conflict with you. You may not even know it, but I am chronically ill because of you. Now of course, I can say you have to change, so I can get healthy. I can say that, but it's not going to happen. But if I get my equities out of you, then I'll be healthy too. After all, it's my conflict, and only I can change my attitude towards you. I managed to do that once. I had chronic eczema on my toes, for over 5 years. I could peel it off, when it was dry. And the skin underneath would be white and soft and itchy. For 5 years I had that chronically, on both sides. Only when everything was done, did I discover my conflict in retrospect. It was my parents. I had this from 1995 to 2000, in the wake of the story with my daughter Olivia. In 1995 my mother brought flowers and homemade cake to the doctor, who reported us and took us to court. And she apologized to him for her son's, my, behavior. My father tearfully declared on TV, that his son must be in a cult. For the next 5 years chronically, it would take less than 5 minutes for the sparks to fly, whenever I saw my parents. So, the discussion was always at 130 decibels. In 2000 I went with my father to the media market, because he wanted to buy a computer. He was born in 1925, so he was 75 years old at the time. Have you ever gone to buy a computer with a 75-year-old? It's really amusing. I was driving him in my car, and he was sitting in the passenger seat beside me. Suddenly I realized that he'd gotten smaller, he was shaking. And he had his third set of teeth. My parents used to turn on the TV early in the morning, and not turn it off until the evening. Supervised thinking all day, every day. At that moment, I thought to myself, well, you won't change this person anymore. And so, I was able to take myself out of it. My mistake was, that I wanted to convert my parents. I could not understand why they did not understand Germanische Heilkunde, but with that one moment of realization, I recognized my father as a human being. He is my father, and he also has his handicaps and deficiencies, and he will never understand Germanische Heilkunde. It is the same with my mother. She will not understand it anymore, and certainly not if they sit in supervised thinking every day, and being brainwashed. And so, I could take myself out of the conflicts with them. From that moment on, there were no more sparks flying. I didn't get involved in a discussion with them. I discussed with them only what was necessary. But I no longer tried to convert them. I was able to remove myself from the story, and my eczema healed on both sides. Father, partner side. Mother, mother-child side. For 5 years, I had literally wanted to be separated from my parents, to have them leave me alone. But this was a most elegant conflict resolution. Maybe this list of how to resolve conflicts is not complete. Maybe one or another option is still missing. A thick wallet naturally also solves some conflicts. The younger person can naturally also resolve conflict more readily than an older person. So, the third biological law of nature. In the first 2 laws of nature, the first one describes the cause. The second one describes the solution. These are the more important 2 biological laws, as Dr. Hummer discovered. The last 3 laws are more descriptive. The third law describes the old brain tumors. Old brain programs make cell proliferation in the active phase, for example the prostate. Brainstem, the yellow group. Here the occurrence becomes bigger and bigger. Old brain programs also include the programs of the cerebellum. A breast cancer getting bigger and bigger, a node is getting bigger and bigger. However, the programs of the cerebrum in the active phase make cell meltdown. In the cerebral medulla programs, the bone decalcifies. Or the squamous epithelium programs, the outer skin, the bronchial lining, the tissues are ulcerated. They make cell meltdown or even functional failure, like diabetes or paralysis. That goes on until the problem is solved, and there is no alternative to that. Mostly, the biological sense of old and new brain programs is in the active phase, nature helping immediately. For example, prostate cancer is the biological sense of the prostate program. The problem for the prostate is that the woman ran away. Now he has the prostate active, and this is the biological sense of the prostate after all. Look how good I am, come back to me. More ejaculate. The biological sense of a node in the breast is, to ensure a higher chance of survival for a sick child. Concerning the bone, if I don't solve the self-devaluation conflict, the bone will break. Here, the sense is only at the end of the healing, when the bone is denser and stronger than before, and remains so. Concerning the squamous epithelium, the meaning of the program is in the active phase. With ulcerative widening of the bronchial tubes. So that I can get more air in. Or widening of the urinary tract, so that I can pass more urine. And in the healing phase, it's repaired under the swelling. It's the same with a loss of function in the active phase of a program. Diabetes is the biological sense. For example, more sugar for more energy to better solve a resistance conflict. More energy to be able to successfully resist the boss, for example. The symptom is not the problem. The conflict, the cause of the symptom, this is the problem. The old brain, that is, the brainstem and cerebellum together, these programs do cell proliferation. The new brain cerebral medulla and cerebral cortex together, what we call the neocortex or cerebrum, these programs do cell reduction. They involve cell loss or just functional failure. One must learn to understand medicine from the history of development. Only then that does the concept fully form. Only then does one understand the conflict content too, the morsel conflict and so on. And how nature associates conflicts to particular tissues of the body. What is a real food morsel for an animal, can be transferred for us humans. For example, as an inheritance or similar. Here's something interesting. The squamous epithelium tissues are the youngest group. Dr. Hummer said that in evolutionary history, the squamous epithelium expanded out of the sinuses and lined the entire pharyngeal area. Squamous epithelium is a very robust tissue. If I choke down a bone there, and it rasps the lining with its sharp edges, that tissue's got to be robust. This squamous epithelium migrated down the small curvature from the stomach to the first section of the duodenum, and then the squamous epithelium stopped. But it also migrated 12 centimeters up the rectum. This is what's visible as hemorrhoids, in the healing phase of a program affecting the rectum. Squamous epithelium also migrated up the entire urinary tract to the renal pelvises, lining the bladder, ureter, renal pelvises, vagina and penis. When in developmental history the rupture of the gullet occurred here, these squamous organs were left without nerve connection and had to be rewired through the spinal cord. That's the phenomenon in paraplegia. The bowel functions down to the rectum, but it can't hold stool or hold urine. These patients need diapers and don't have erections, but they also don't starve. And that is irreversible, because there is no more nerve cell division after birth, so injury to the nerves is irreversible. But now there is the phenomenon of someone having an accident and ending up in a wheelchair, but the doctors can't find a mechanical reason. This patient has suffered a motor conflict, and in principle this is solvable. In principle, every conflict is theoretically solvable. How it looks in practice is something else again. Yes, there are practically unsolvable conflicts. If the mother wants to stay separated from the child, then the conflict is unsolvable for the child. One day, a patient in a wheelchair with paraplegia met with Dr. Hummer. The doctors found no mechanical reason for his paraplegia, and Dr. Hummer saw in his brain CT that he even solved the motor conflict occasionally. Dr. Hummer said to him, "You are a little swindler. You can move your feet, right?" Said the man in the wheelchair, "Doctor, that's right. Occasionally I can move my feet. Do you think I can walk again?" Dr. Hummer replied, "If you avoid the track, then you will be able to walk again." Said the man in the wheelchair, "Doctor, I request one day to think about it." The next day, he rolled up in his wheelchair and said, "Look, doctor. I have a 4,000 German marks pension. My entire house is rebuilt, and I have benefits everywhere. Let's leave it as it is." He preferred not to be able to walk again. You also have to accept that. You can't do much against the will of the patient. So, motor-wise, the squamous epithelium of these lower organs was rewired via the spinal cord, and sensory-wise, they were connected to the outer skin. Now we have two different patterns of squamous epithelium. The so-called outer skin pattern, which includes the outer skin, neurodermatitis, psoriasis, warts, but also the urinary tract, hemorrhoids, and uterine cervix. And we have the so-called gullet mucosa pattern. Here we have the duodenal ulcer, the gastric ulcer, the esophagus, we have the coronary vessels. We have the periosteum, and we have caries. We have in the oral mucosa the aphthay, canker sore. That's the gullet mucosa pattern. Squamous epithelium ulcerates in the active phase, and is repaired under swelling in the healing phase. This is always the same. In a crisis, we always have an absence. Absence means absent thinking. When someone's in absence, if you address him, he doesn't react. A neurodermatitis patient has an absence in the crisis. A heart attack patient is absent during the crisis. And also, bronchitis has absence in crisis, always because everything is the squamous epithelium. That concerns the entire red group, which is all squamous epithelium. The difference between outer skin pattern and gullet mucosa pattern is, in the active phase, the gullet mucosa pattern hurts. Angina pectoris is a conflict active symptom. Stomach pain, the stomach ulcer, that hurts in the conflict active phase. Caries hurt in the active phase. A hole in the oral mucosa hurts in the active phase, but is numb in the healing phase. When the active phase of a program hurts, the crisis always hurts. So, for example, a heart attack is painful. But if the active phase is numb, then the crisis is also numb. A patient with neurodermatitis in crisis has no pain. He is in absence, but he feels no pain. He has pain only in the healing. Terrible phrases, gullet mucus pattern, and outer skin pattern. The outer skin hurts in the healing. The milk ducts, mastitis, intraductal breast carcinoma, hurt in the healing phase. The nasal mucosa hurt in healing. Bronchitis hurts in the healing. Hemorrhoids ache in the healing. Renal pelvic inflammation is also always healing. It hurts in the healing. In the active phase, it is numb. Bladder inflammation is healing. The uterine cervix is painful in healing. Conjunctivitis is healing. Tooth enamel hurts in the active phase. In the excretory ducts of the parotid gland, in the healing we have mumps. That hurts in the active phase. That's like when you bite into a lemon and everything contracts and that then makes pain. That can be pretty severe as well. The esophagus hurts in the active phase. Interestingly, also the excretory ducts of the lacrimal glands, these hurt in the active phase. The small curvature of the stomach, the gastric ulcer also hurts in the active phase. And when the active phase hurts, the crisis always hurts too. A gastric epilepsy patient has pain. The liver bile ducts also follow the gullet mucosa pattern. They hurt in the active phase. The squamous epithelium of the pancreatic excretory duct also hurts in the active phase. In angina pectoris, if the territorial loss conflict is downgraded, the pain also lessens. But in the crisis, heart attack, I have very severe pain again. Also, the periosteum. That's where the term rheumatism, flowing pain, applies. Not to be confused with the rheumatism of the joints, which is the healing from self-devaluation, while the periosteum is a brutal separation conflict. In the periosteum, we have pain in the active phase, and the part is ice cold, as in Raynaud's disease. The conventional doctor would say, these are circulatory disorders. These are the patients who go to bed with 2 pairs of socks and still, their feet do not get warm if they have associated the brutal separation to their feet. Like this sea anemone. Sea anemones show the earliest body structure of an animal. It's hard to tell, but the million-year-old sea anemones have an up and a down. A real head is missing, but this is replaced by a mouth opening. Right next to this is the counterpart, known in humans as the anus. So, as mentioned before, the rupture of the ring structure occurred approximately at the larynx. Our head is the primordial head, our mouth is the primordial mouth, and then it goes on to the right. Picking up the morsel, that's now the esophagus, the stomach. The rupture is approximately at the point where the small intestine passes into the large intestine. The whole intestine thereafter is the indigestible morsel. A fecal morsel I want to get rid of. The rectum used to be on the left side of the larynx. And glandular tissue at the head area is also about getting rid of the morsel in case of conflict. With the eye, the light morsel, the middle ear, the information morsel, and so on. So right is incoming and left is outgoing. Our ancestor was in principle like this sea anemone. As mentioned before, animal life is a few 100 million years old. It started with a single-celled organism. From that, the various genera and species have evolved, and to that extent, we are all related. Ladies and gentlemen, that completes my content for this topic. I would be pleased to welcome you again to the next seminar video of Germanische Heilkunde. Until then, I wish you a wonderful time. Helmut Pilhar, father of Olivia.